great defense system that we'll learn about toward the end of the year, and that defense system usually notices cancer cells and kills them. This is happening in every one of us every day. You are having cellular changes called mutations, and you're none the worse for it because your body identifies those mutations and kills them. This is kind of scary to think about, but if we have an intruder at school, most likely we're going to be able to identify that intruder quickly. He's not going to be one of our students, and notice I said he because usually those individuals are males. However, if one of our students came to school one day and intended to do something bad, they would get into the school just fine, and we wouldn't notice them. This is a problem in your body as well, because cancer cells come from your cells. It's not like an invader, like a bacteria or virus that we would notice so easily. Cancer cells are where your cells turn bad, and so they don't have a problem getting in there. And so for some people, particularly as you get older and older, those mutations that we get can get overlooked and not destroyed, and then they multiply. And so if a cell survives, it can divide, and it forms a mass of cells called a tumor. Now, a lot of times we hear tumor, we think bad, but that's not necessarily true. A tumor is just a mass of cells, and so some tumors can be what are called benign tumors. This is an abnormal cell that's growing out of control, but it stays where it starts, and it doesn't really have a lot of changes going on. A benign tumor is just a mass of cells, and so these can often be surgically removed. They're rarely serious to people, other than being something that people maybe don't like to see. One of the most common of these is called a lipoma, which is a little mass of fat cells that a lot of people get right underneath their skin. I know I personally have a couple lipomas on my thigh. A lot of people have lipomas somewhere on their body. And at first it feels bad because it's a strange lump right under your skin, but it really doesn't hurt anything. And if you wanted it to, it could be cut out pretty easily. Now, the problem with a tumor is if it becomes malignant. A malignant tumor has so many different genetic changes that it will try to, and usually succeed in, spreading to other tissues, and can start to affect other organs. If you have a malignancy, this is when a doctor would say that you have cancer. A doctor's never going to tell you that you have cancer if you have a benign tumor. This just means you have an abnormal growth of cells. But if you have a malignant growth of cells, then you might have cancer and would be diagnosed with cancer. Now these pictures that I threw up here are actually both types of skin cancer, but one more serious than another. This is called a basal cell carcinoma. This would be oftentimes a mole that becomes cancerous and changes. And this is a type of cancer, so this can be malignant, but these are usually not as worried about. They can be cut out pretty easily, and they're not a big deal. However, this is a picture of what's called malignant melanoma. Malignant melanoma is a lot more serious because it spreads rapidly. And so this is the skin cancer that we need to be afraid of right here. Because if you develop malignant melanoma, maybe by the time you get that looked at by a doctor, you have cancer in other parts of your body as well. And so that's the major concern, which we'll talk about later this year a little more too, with all the sun tanning and tanning beds and all that stuff that happens today. It's not so much these basal cell carcinomas, which a lot of older people get, but these melanomas that we have to worry about. Now, this is probably my favorite picture that I ever made as a textbook illustrator with Dr. Wong, and we call this Metastasis Man, very lovingly, Metastasis Man. And this is showing us one of the scariest things that happens when you have a malignancy. Malignancy can lead to metastasis or become metastatic, which is where cells will move from their original site. And so what this picture is trying to show us is that maybe this person has a colon cancer right here to start with, and that if that colon cancer doesn't get identified and get treated, it might spread and become lung cancer, it might spread and become liver cancer, it might spread and become bone cancer. Now it could also become other things too, but statistically we see that colon cancer, if it becomes metastatic, usually moves to the lungs, the liver, or the bones. Now, what kind of changes happen within the cell when we see cancer? The first thing we already talked about, excessive proliferation, so the cell will rapidly divide. Other things that we can see is sometimes the mutation is a difference in the number of chromosomes. So instead of seeing that normal number of chromosomes in a cell, which is 46 for humans, we might see something different, like 47 or 48 or 49, and that becomes a concern. A lot of times metabolism can get all messed up. We say disabled, which makes it sound like it shuts down, but usually metabolism ramps up and it keeps up with all that cell division by doing more metabolism. Most cancer cells are going to lose their function. This is what becomes a problem, right? If a bunch of your lung cells here are not doing their job and helping with gas exchange, you can't breathe. So the problem with a lot of cancer cells is that they don't do the job that they're supposed to do wherever they're sitting or whatever organ they're in. We also sometimes lose that extracellular matrix, so the cell becomes detached from other cells, which allows it to metastasize. And then other times, or most cancers, will secrete signals that increase blood vessel formation. So you're going to get this new mass of cells, right, growing on your skin or whatever it is. It's going to need blood vessels to give it blood, and so it can cause blood vessels to grow as well. Now, just a little mention about treatment, because we hear so much about it. When somebody has cancer, there's usually two ways that we attack it. That's radiation and chemotherapy. Obviously, if you have a surface cancer or a cancer that's not so hard to get to, we can do surgery as well. But sometimes that's also not an option. So in radiation, like you see a version of here, we're going to shoot somebody with a whole bunch of energy, basically, radiation. And this used to be really dangerous. Now it's really well done. It's fine-tuned. Doctors can pinpoint even tiny groups of cells to hit with the radiation, and they're getting more and more successful with this. The problem is that when you radiate somebody, you are going to damage the DNA of lots of cells, including those cells that are normal. What we've seen through research is that what radiation primarily does is it hurts a cell's ability to repair itself or to recover from damage. So the good news is, if this happens to a cancer cell, the cancer cell dies. If it happens to your normal cell, the normal cell also will probably die. The bigger concern is if you have a normal cell that survives radiation, then that cell could become cancerous itself. And so we do have cases where we probably see people getting cancer a second time because of their radiation therapy that they had. But usually that's not going to be the case. The other side that we've all heard of is chemotherapy. This is just a fancy name for drugs. Generally these drugs are intravenous or IV drugs though, so you have to go somewhere to get chemotherapy versus just popping a pill at home like you might for an infection or something. There's a lot of different chemotherapy drugs on the market, and there's more coming out every day. They are going to interfere with the cell cycle at various places. And so kind of the classic example, one of the oldest chemotherapy drugs is Taxol. Taxol goes into your system and it will freeze the mitotic spindle. So it'll stabilize your microtubules. If the mitotic spindle gets frozen, your chromosomes can't move on it. So your chromosomes won't line up at the midline, they won't spread apart, and you won't get cell division. This is highly effective at stopping cancer cells from dividing. The problem is, it stops your normal cells from dividing too. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with some of the side effects of chemotherapy, like losing your hair, like being nauseous, like getting infections. And that's because we're stopping the cell division of normal things. If we stop skin cells from dividing, we don't get hair support and maintenance anymore. And we also get some rashes sometimes. If we stop the digestive tract cells from dividing, we get nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, those kind of problems. And if we stop our immune system cells from dividing, then we don't get as good of protection against infection. And so the side effects of chemotherapy drugs are also because we're stopping cell division. But it's probably worth it. If we can stop cancer cells, we're better off. Sort of the new era of cancer treatment is what we call personalized treatment, though. Every cancer cell is probably a little bit different. And so if we can test a person's cancer and that individual person has a different kind of cancer, it will allow us to maybe treat or target those cells in particular. So let's look at an example of this on the last slide as we wrap up. breast cancer is one of the most common cancers in the country, extraordinarily common, obviously, in women, but also possible in men. Really great study done in 2011, which is getting a little dated now, but there hasn't been this comprehensive a study done since, showed that 1 in every 8 women are going to be diagnosed with breast cancer. Scary. It really is. Scary for you guys as women, scary for me as someone who has a wife and a daughter and a mom and everything else. But 1 out of 8 women are going to get breast cancer. The really good news about this is that even though the incidence gets higher almost every year, so we see more and more cases of breast cancer, the mortality or the death rate from it goes down because our research has shown us better ways to treat this, better ways to identify this. It used to be you didn't get diagnosed with breast cancer until you were really late in its stages. Today, we find out for most women who go to the doctor regularly and things really early. And so we can treat that, whether it means cutting it off or treating it with radiation and drugs. We can treat that breast cancer and stop it. And so you're seeing more and more survivors, even though you're seeing more and more cases to begin with. This is a mammogram, which you guys are maybe familiar with already. Basically, a mammogram is an ultrasound of the breast. It doesn't give you a very good picture, as you can see. If we have someone who has had breast cancer before, or if there's something that's fishy about a mammogram, you automatically call for an MRI. An MRI is going to show you a lot better. This MRI is normal, so there's not cancer in this person. What you're seeing here, these specks are just different parts of the milk ducts, and here's the body wall and muscle coming in here. But that's what it would look like if we were scanning for it. Now, if we get a tumor that grows in the breast, it usually grows in these glands, right? And it can get bigger, as we see here, and bigger. And the scary thing is if it gets big enough and it becomes that malignancy, where then it can go to either blood vessels or lymph vessels, which we'll talk about later this year, and spread to other parts of the body. So, having breast cancer, not a good thing, not the end of the world. If it turns into other types of cancers as well, then we have to stop or start worrying, and it becomes a lot harder to treat. Now, we talked a minute ago about personalized treatment. There are specific treatments now for breast cancer in particular that we don't use for other cancers. And that's because breast cancer oftentimes has receptors. These breast cancer cells have specific receptors on them. One of these groups are called HER2 receptors. And about 1/4 of breast cancers are HER2 positive or have these types of receptors. If that's the case, we can give these women a drug called Herceptin. The drug binds to these receptors and stops cell division, and is pretty effective. Now, there's another drug that you might have heard of before because it's one of the most common, called tamoxifen. Tamoxifen binds to estrogen receptors and stops those cells from dividing. Now, about 3/4 of women have what we call ER positive breast cancer, which means it has estrogen receptors on its cancerous cells. So in any case, we have different drugs today for different types of cancers, and that was not the case even 5-10 years ago. So today we get better and better at treating these things and better at stopping them. Okay, so I've talked long enough. Hope that this helps a little bit clear up some of the things and add some things to the Chapter 9. We will be ready later this week to do our mitosis lab and keep on moving forward. So keep up the good work.